Welcome to Change the Conversation. I'm Natalia Loback, founder and principal of Chart House Advisory Services. And today I'm here with my friend, Michael Schiel, who is a certified high performance coach and a transformation consultant. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you on this series because as we've had a number of conversations leading into this one that we're sharing with others, we just have so much in common in terms of where we've come from, where we're going, and the type of work that we do. Michael, can you tell our viewers a little bit more about yourself, your business, and the type of work that you do?
For sure. So let's start back to ancient times. I sort of grew up in a big firm working on organization design, lean process improvement, helping a variety of different organizations with things like that. I got to the point where I worked my way up the line, and I got to the partner level, and I was pursuing to be a partner at the big firm, and I realized I don't want to be a partner at a big firm doing lots of bureaucratic stuff. I actually like helping community organizations and broader public sector in particular and helping them do their real work. And I couldn't do that sitting from an office. And so I went off on my own about 12, 15 years ago. And since then, what I do is I work with broader public sector organizations, particularly the community sector, but really it could be provincial ministry, hospital, lots of child and youth mental health, organizations that work with adults with disabilities. And I help them improve, basically, as I look at it. So, process improvement, cutting their costs, helping them when they get their funding cut, but they still need to provide more services to more people. How do we do that? So I've got a sort of a basket of tools that I use and approaches that I use to help them figure that out. And I love helping that sector.
It's so interesting because this is one of the areas that you and I have a lot in common. So for those who may or may not know my story, I've spent a lot of my past experience working in healthcare, publicly funded organizations. Here in Canada, healthcare is government funded. And so a lot of public sector experience. And, as I built Chart House and I built practice, working with mission-driven, service-based organizations that are active in their communities has been a real driver in how I want to make a difference in this world and how I want to help people change. Something that we had talked about was, how unique the public sector and community-driven sector is. So for the folks who are watching, Michael, can you give us a little color on, what's so different about community-driven organizations?
For sure. And I'll tell you, I do this from an experience of doing transformation projects with private sector, private, and public sector. I've got lots of experience in both over the last 20, 25 years. I think the biggest thing is particularly public sector organizations are driven by your funder, the ministry that's funding you. So we're here in Ontario, Canada, but anywhere in Canada. But I would say this is the same. I've worked with public sector organizations in the States. It's the same thing. You've got a funder. You've got specific parameters that they lay out in the legislation where here's what your organization needs to do. And so you're really restricted as an organization that you're funded to do those things. And if you want to do something more or something different, that can be really, really hard, that you just don't have the space to do it. You can't just innovate and create a new service line because you might not be funded for that and they might not allow that. I think that's the first area where it's completely different. When I'm working with a private sector organization, if they want to roll out a new line or do something new or different or like a new IT system, they can just go ahead and do it. But you can't do that when you're publicly funded.
It's true. There's that strong culture of accountability in public sector, and it's in some cases for things like change and transformation, it's a double-edged sword. And my experience in the private sector mirrors yours. So when a big organization, profit-driven organization wants to change, they strike a project, they put funding together, a budget, and they go and do it. And it's really easy to get into that, to ride that wave. The other thing that I find really interesting about public sector that we've talked about is that political environment.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at, right, like the big P politics, and politically, the political system that is figuring out how to fund these organizations, and there's competition and there's scarce resources, and then how that reflects into the organizations themselves. And so you see this cultural pattern and this environmental pattern repeating. I find that incredibly interesting.
I was literally just having this conversation yesterday with a healthcare client. I'm doing project management advice for this client. They are rolling out, it's about a $10-12 million budget for this big IT project that will impact a lot of healthcare stakeholders. And we're trying to figure out over this next year, since there's a provincial election coming up, what does that mean for our rollout strategy? What does that mean for communications and stakeholder engagement? Because when the red drops, you can't communicate. When you're publicly funded, you're not allowed to communicate or look like you're lobbying for something. And so that has a big impact on how you can actually plan and manage change and what you can do and who you can talk to. Yeah.
It's amazing. The number of constraints that happen in the sector around transformation and change and how that happens and how to do that effectively. It just makes changing and effective change and really helping organizations do that. It just makes it so much more difficult. On the flip side, I find it really rewarding because the impact that you have is incredible. But it just makes it so much more difficult. Can you share, just for people who may be part of that sector, they may understand, but for those who don't, do you have a story that illustrates that or an example that you could share?
For sure. I've got one community sector organization. They deal with adults with disabilities. They had their funding cut, and they, at the same time, had been asked by their funder to serve more clients than what they had before. And so they suddenly had to figure out, well, how do we cut our budget yet serve more people? And nobody on the team had the experience to be able to actually plan that out. They did have a COO who had that, but that person left. And so the person that I was tasked to work with was a manager who had no background in change management or transformation and had no idea where to start or what to do. And by the way, already had their full capacity, and they were sort of doing this off the side of their desk. And I use that because that is like such a typical example that people who don't have the training or the background for this are asked to do this because they don't have the funding to hire someone to do this, and they have no time, and they're told, you need to transform in the next 3 months. Like, what do you do? How do I do this? What are the steps? Can I do this? How do I know what to do? Where do I go? And so, I mean, to the point you just made, what I love is being able to give even just a simple framework to say, here's how you can approach transformation in a community sector setting, and here's the framework, and here's the things to think about. And yes, you can do this. There's lots of organizations that have done this, and you can do this too. I think that's the big thing that I like.
And something that you just said reminded me as well. I've been working and developing a framework called Connected Change. And one of the things that we acknowledge and pay quite a bit of attention to in the model is the external political environment and the internal political environment, and how politics, power, and influence play a role in how you can affect change. The reason why I did that was because in other models and in other organizations, this is the gap. This is the gap that we're often trying to deal with. And a lot of times these factors are not made visible, or in organizations, it's just, in public sector organizations, it's just so much part of the fabric of being that we almost forget that it's there.
Yeah, and it happens like every day with and particularly, the sandbox I play in the most is community sector, and it's sort of a competition and collaboration within an organization and between organizations within a community. Because every dollar that comes to your organization won't go to that other organization down the street. And you both want to help out the community, do what you can, but you also want to survive. And and to your point, the politics within an organization, there is another large community organization I work with where there's probably a couple hundred staff, and there is this unwritten knowledge in the staff that if you want to get change done, the ED will only go to those 2 senior managers, but they won't go to those senior managers. So if you want to work on something cool, make sure you work with those senior managers. And nobody will listen if it's not those senior managers. So it's like right there, there's already something that's stopping transformation from being effective, because there's this sort of thought that there's this knowledge of that. And so there's the politics at play, even within the organization, to try to get change done. And that, and I guess to your point, there are no other models out there that actually even talk about that. Nobody seems to think about that as a problem. That's a huge part of what you and I do, I think, every day.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna, you know what, we're gonna be back with another conversation, and I'm so excited to continue this because I'd like to talk a little bit about what people can do, or what solutions people can find to help improve some of these environments. Or if you are, you know, a manager who finds a transformation project landed on your desk, what can you do? So thank you for speaking with me, Michael.
I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks so much for having me.